On behalf of my colleagues, welcome to today's GNCC Lunch and Learn. It's all about building your business through cultural awareness, from customers to hiring the right talent. Let's take a look at some of the statistics. Last month, Niagara's unemployment rate was still at a very low level of 4.4%. And when we take a look nationwide, job vacancies were at a record high of just under 1 million from coast to coast to coast, which is still significantly higher than what we saw 3 years ago. In Canada, our population is among the oldest in the world and our birth rate is among the lowest. And organizations and businesses are facing a challenge in expanding their labor force and to meet their own goals. To deal with this challenge, the Canadian government announced about a year ago that we are going to welcome just under 1.5 million newcomers between now and 2025, which is about double the amount of what the historic rates have been. And this is our opportunity. This webinar is focused on exactly that, how to intend and how we can help Niagara employers take a look at creative ways of building a cultural awareness to help attract the talent we need and the loyal customers we want. Plenty of success can be achieved with just some minor changes to your business to help it to be more welcoming to Niagara's growing diverse population. My name is Mishka Balsam, and I will be your moderator for the next hour. We are joined by two YMCA of Niagara Employment and Immigrant Service team members who are no stranger to all of you on this call. Deanna is the General Manager, Employment and Immigrant Services, and Kelly Jones, the Program Manager for the Power of Trades and Employer Link. And before we start, let me give a really loud shout out to the organization, the YMCA Employment and Immigrant Service of Niagara, who has been a leading partner to our Lunch and Learn session. Whether you're looking for an entry-level work or for a more senior role, finding a job is always easy. And in today's climate, it's more challenging than ever. That's why they offer employment programs to support employees through this process. And if you're an employer, they offer extensive employment service programs too. Both Deanna and Kelly are passionate about the work of the YMCA Employment and Immigrant Services of Niagara, and so are we. Today's format is very much aligned with what we normally do during a Lunch and Learn. The first part of it will be about a 30-minute presentation, which will be followed by the question and answer period. Some of you have already submitted your questions in advance, and we thank you very much for that, and we're committed to getting to all of them. If you wish to enable live transcript, just refer to the bottom of your Zoom screen for that option. And this session is recorded and will be recorded, and we're looking forward to sharing it with you shortly after the webinar is over. And on that note, I'm going to pass this presentation, this part of the webinar, over to Deanna. Over to you.
Thank you, Mishka. Hi, everyone. As Mishka has said, we're here to talk a little bit about building our business through cultural awareness. Thank you, Kelly, for throwing that up there. Part of what we wish to talk about today is much to Mishka's point. You know what, Kel, if you don't mind, I'm actually going to ask you to throw that down. Thank you. The only reason, and I wish this was a live screen because I think we do so much better when it's a live screen, but I'm going to be watching the chat, which is why I asked the screen to go off. So for the purpose of opening, if you could please, in the chat, if I ask you to tell me what is culture, in the chat, could you throw that in there for me, please? Folks can start typing in, what is culture? The employees, the staff. Okay, good. Excellent. Thank you, Nadine. Okay. And companies' beliefs, values, and attitudes. Excellent. Okay. So part of what, and I'll keep throwing some stuff in there, guys. It's quite good. We'll keep up as best as we can. A sense of ideas, thinking among a group of people. Excellent. Okay. So one of the things we really think about in terms of where I work at the Y, when we talk about workplace culture, we talk about our mission, our vision, our values, where we want to go to deepen our impact, the relationship we have with our clients and our staff. But really, we talk more about culture in terms of how it makes people feel versus action items we wish to put into place. And so today, what we want to talk about, we're going to break the session up, and I'll talk for the first little bit, and then Kelly will talk for the second half. I want to wrap our heads first around the idea of culture in the workplace, but I want to marry that to the culture of an individual. So a culture in terms of where they're coming from, a culture of what makes me feel comfortable, what makes me feel safe, what makes me feel familiar. To Mishka's point, she talked about 1.5 million being the government's strategic initiative in terms of having newcomers come forward. 1.5 million immigrants coming to the country. The first thing we think about is labor market ability. So how they will attach to our labor market. But what we don't always put into context as a business, and we really should, because it is the driving force of our business, it's to make money, is the customers we're about to serve. And so if I were to ask you, and again, you can throw into chat, how do you appeal to other cultures outside of what you've established as your workplace culture? So if you've done anything, maybe it's hire a specific language, just throw that into the chat as we're talking, and I'll reflect on that, and it helps us guide the conversation based on, what folks are already doing, or are we starting from a base set of knowledge here? And so when I think about what currently exists in Niagara, when we talk about the top languages or the top communities that are coming in, aside from the tragedies that are happening with the war in Ukraine, the folks who have fled to Turkey, with regards to the earthquakes, Congo, all of these things are Haiti, all these things are really impacting what we're seeing in Niagara. And so if we think about it, the top languages, for example, we have Spanish that are coming in, we have French that are Francophone speaking that are coming in. Arabic is another large language, the Afghanistans that are coming in. Has your business thought about how to meet the needs of those individuals as they come in? And if you haven't, this is the perfect opportunity to not only look at the folks that are coming in as a means to fill your labor market, but it's also a means for you to look at your business to talk about what areas of strategic growth would I like to have based on the market that's coming in. Because they are a market, they're going to be and they will continue to be a large portion of the market share of the customers that are in our community, whether it's banking, whether it's auto sales, whether it's grocery stores, it could be health and fitness, such as our YMCA. But when we think about it in the context of who we want to hire, are we hiring to capture market share? And so one of the things that, I would ask that, as you maybe have some paper in front of you and write down some thoughts, how many languages does your workforce speak? How many languages do you offer literature about your business in? Are you cognizant of, yes, there are, Canada has become very robust in its embracing of diversity and transgenders. And so we have, not male, female bathrooms necessarily. We have singular bathrooms where anybody can go and enter in them. But is that culturally appropriate for others who are coming to Canada? How do we still appeal to the fact that there is a degree of separation that is required in order for them to feel comfortable? And these little pieces, while they seem small, the market share of those individuals is quite large. And so, for example, the one bank, and I've been doing this for about 30 years, and one of the very first banks who came forward and began understanding the diverse needs of its customers and was focused on being more welcoming was through Welland, and it was Scotiabank. And I remember them tapping us on the shoulder, and Welland Heritage Council for that matter, on the shoulder, and they were talking about, how do I hire individuals who allow my customers to be able to communicate in first language? And when we're talking about banking and mortgages and credit cards, all those nuances and those pieces of information are absolutely critical to be delivered in first language, because we want folks to feel safe. We want them to understand what they're actually signing up for and what that means, because banking from one country to another country is very, very different. Purchasing a car from one country to another country is very, very different, as is purchasing a home and those other needs. If we think about it in terms of context of our local grocers. So I think about where in my neighborhood, my neck of the woods, and where our office is, we have, there's 2 No Frills, there's a Food Basics and a Metro. And it's very interesting when you see over the course of my time shopping at those stores, how aisles have changed. I think it's brilliant, actually. It just reminds me how multicultural my community is becoming, and I absolutely love it. And aisles have changed, food choices have changed. But what I find most interesting is the recruitment efforts of the staff hasn't necessarily kept pace with the fact that they've changed aisles, but they haven't necessarily changed their service, frontline service industry to ensure that it meets the language need in terms of service quality and service delivery. And I think for the stores that have figured some of that out, you will see more individuals will gravitate to that particular business, because there's an ease in which I can communicate. There's a sense of familiarity when I walk into that business. And so Kelly will be talking in a moment about the importance of strategically hiring internationally trained individuals and what that means, whether it's entry-level employment or higher skilled educated individuals into your business. Either way, the level of the person that you are hiring or the position you're looking to fill, when we broaden that cultural sense that's happening in our business through the people that we're hiring, our business will ultimately win. One of the things that I have learned, and again, it's out of ignorance originally, and I own that 100%, as I've developed myself in immigrant services, and I have some amazing staff who've taken the time to help educate and help me understand so that we can ensure we're being as culturally inclusive as possible. And we've also taken to understanding what our hiring needs and stuff are, and we're blending those pieces together. I think one of the amazing things that folks have taught me is how fast newcomers will spread the word on whether a business is inclusive and welcoming or whether a business is not. And when I say fast, if we've helped one person in employment services walk into an office and they've come into our employment center or into our fitness center and they've had a really positive, good experience, without question, the next week I have 50. And then the week after that, I have 100. And it is that fast. They are the fastest marketing tool with our newcomers to Canada, with our immigrants, is literally giving good service to one person, and their community quickly knows. And it does play out negatively in the opposite way if we're not also being open and inclusive. So I really did want to bring some of those pieces to the forefront, because I do believe that one of the things that we hear a lot of our businesses are still struggling with is, yes, getting the staff, but also in terms of the fact that business is low. It's slowed down. I have not recovered since COVID, depending on the industry that they are in. And I think that when we look at the 1.5 million folks that are coming, all ages, you know, if you are a children's clothing store, how are you marketing your clothing so that it is more open and more inclusive? If I think about, and folks who have been through immigration for a long time, if we think about, you know, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, even up to the 70s, a lot of the individuals who came in, they just started opening up their own shops to get their own culture, food, clothing, and some of those other pieces. And while we still see that happening today, it would be nice if our community was positioned in a way that individuals didn't have to create shops. Instead, the shops that they were already in their neighborhood were inclusive of them. And that includes the clothing, the food, and those other items. And so it seems simple in nature, but I know it's not, but it is a goal of ours. Certainly within YMCA Immigrant Services, it is a goal of ours to ensure that while we're talking to employers, while we're talking to other community partners, whether we're talking to mental health or health services or others, that, you know, we are driving home the notion that everybody should feel welcome when they come into your place of business. And if we have positioned our staffing model correctly, your business will definitely increase without question. And so that's partly why we wanted to be a part of the Lunch and Learn today and talk a little bit about those simple little things. And again, I'm not the best on the Zoom platform. I believe a lot of energy comes from when you can be front and center in a room. And so if you're part of the call today and you'd like to have further discussion, you'd like to do a little bit of a deeper dive in person, Kelly and I, and or any members of our team are more than happy to come out. It is not our goal or our role to preach EDI. We realize everybody is becoming very, very culturally aware. They're making sure their staff are getting training. This really is about coming in and talking about your business, looking at the goods and services or the industry that you're in, and really getting to, well, how can we help that business grow? And how can we help you fill your labor market gaps? And so that's part of what today's discussion is focused on, but I do welcome the opportunity to do so in person as well. So with that, Kelly, good to my less than 20. I am going to flip the session over to you. I do love the statement that Kelly has put up on the PowerPoint presentation. Inclusion and fairness in the workplace is not simply the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. Excellent statement. As Kelly moves into the discussion around hiring ITIs, I would ask that we really focus on keeping in mind that fairness and equity is really important when we're hiring internationally trained individuals. We get calls quite a bit. Lots of employers are starting to now embrace the idea that labor market needs can be filled through internationally trained individuals or through regular routes of immigration. And as somebody who works with these individuals on a daily basis, I would ask that you really give consideration to when you are hiring an internationally trained individual, is to recognize that many of them will bring years and years worth of service and work experience with them. And that as we go to staff, we're not always just looking at the notion of we're helping them get their foot in the door and giving them a good opportunity here in their first job in Canada. Well, that is all fair and well, and certainly, we value that. We also would look to have employers recognize the years of service that that individual does bring. And so as an employer, if you're looking at hiring somebody who you're in need of an accountant, and recognizing their CPA levels as well, but if you are looking at hiring an accountant, that we're not assuming the person that we're hiring has years of experience, but it's not in Canada. And so we're going to start them at the entry level wage. I would ask that we look at the years of service, years of experience, and we recognize that level of tenure when they're coming into our workforce. It's very, very important. And we don't always see that. And so again, inclusion and fairness in the workplace is not simply the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. Keeping all those hiring pieces and inclusivity and fairness and equity in place, a good employee talks about their place of business all the time. They are your greatest brand ambassador. And so when you are embracing internationally trained individuals and or other newcomers who come into your workplace. Remember when I said earlier about how fast the word gets out to come and shop at my store? It's just as fast to talk about how positive or negative a work environment can be. And if we make it positive, more will come, including the customers. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me today, and I'll turn the floor over to Kelly.
Thanks, Deanna. So when Deanna and I were preparing this workshop for the Lunch and Learn, we really wanted to examine and obviously start asking questions right off the hop and making sure that everybody had some good self-reflection just to start off the presentation. Now we're going to get into some more, I guess you'd say, specifics or best practices as we move forward. And I think Deanna and I are both looking forward to obviously the Q&A pieces that are going to happen in this workshop. But I just want to reiterate her invite to look at especially our employer link program that we're working with the Workforce Collective in furthering those conversations and improving that diversity in maybe in a smaller setting with myself and Deanna and the rest of our staff here at the YMCA of Niagara. So just really wanted to reiterate that that piece there, and then to talk about, looking at fairness in the workplace and inclusion is the smart thing to do. One of the examples that made me think when Deanna was talking about expanding your business is that I was watching the hockey game probably 3 weeks ago, and I gave Deanna this info. I was getting the West Coast feed, Vancouver car dealership. In the commercial, they went through the 4 or 5 different languages that they have in their sales team. And so obviously I know English is the dominant language, same thing with French here in Canada, but they were saying, we understand that purchasing a car is a complex process. So we'll help you serve you in your native language with translated paperwork. It was just really amazing to see that. So, we're going to change gears to obviously looking at the hiring piece, but I think that from a customer piece, as Niagara becomes more diverse, we got to remember those small little invitations for inclusion are going to be absolutely crucial. And we're going to talk about how we're going to move that forward. So we're looking at, the power of hiring new Canadians. So what are the importance of, what are some of the benefits at the end of the road? And what Dan and I will tell you is that it's not a very complex or long road. It's just those small changes. So when you start bringing in hiring new Canadians, new Canadians can provide insights on the way you do business in Niagara and beyond. As we talked about accessing the word of mouth that are happening in a lot of our cultural communities here in Niagara. I can speak very specifically over the last 15 years, St. Catharines specifically, and I'm going to pat Deanna on the back here, is that she understood that our Colombian and Latino community was growing and people were coming into the office. And then in response to that, Deanna and the human resource team started hiring more people that could speak Spanish and serve those clients that were coming in. So once they started, getting into the community, we had that word of mouth piece, and then of course those Latin speaking and Latin cultural background employees started bringing in that perspective, and now we have a very strong reputation and in the Latin community here in St. Catharines and beyond. So, just bringing those new perspectives helped from a cultural staff team internally here, and then also dealing with the customers. Because even though we're a nonprofit, there's no difference. We need people to come into the doors, access our services, just like a lot of you on this call, is you need people coming into the doors or accessing you online and committing to your services. So nonprofit or for-profit, the serving people and getting them engaged to your services are exactly the same. So the new language piece, not a lot of employers that are, let's say, in the early parts of their journey and hiring new Canadians, the first question they ask me is, what's their English like? What are their English skills like? And that's an important question, especially from a health and safety, if it's more construction or industrial manufacturing and so on. And yes, they need to have strong English skills, but it should be like, what languages do they speak? How can we get this? So obviously asking their English level is important, but seeing it's an opportunity that these new languages can serve new customer groups, get into those cultural communities, build your reputation. And, it's just a matter of how can we get our product, our services out to more people? Well, in their language where they're more comfortable in communicating is a huge step. And so as you see in the second point here, it can improve your overall communication and branding with your company's marketing. So we're seeing a lot of big trends with diversity and inclusion with marketing, which is great to see. And it's kind of a little bit behind, but it's definitely catching up quite well. And looking at the new values. And I know that ultimately Deanna was very open and honest about her journey of over the last 20 years of working in New Canadian services. And same thing with me, especially over the last 2 years, I've been focusing on New Canadian programs, and how much learning I've done as a multi-generational white Canadian is important. Those values have taught me, and of course our YMCA team, and the same thing can happen with your staff team. And it doesn't take an overly complex equity and diversity inclusion plan. We're going to talk a little bit further, but it's all about those small little things. And of course, from a cultural piece, new music, new food, the things that we enjoy in our life day to day, that's brought into your workplace. And we can speak directly for the YMCA of Niagara. As we've grown our diversity, it's just been a great celebration of different cultures, and it's been awesome. I know Deanna will add more to that after. So why hire internationally trained individuals? So we're looking at a lot of things tapping into what Mishka talked about, is that there's some gaps here in Niagara. I'm having conversations with employers saying they can't find skilled people, and then, they're not accessing some of the skilled people that maybe have been internationally trained. So one of the key things, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, is that the learning curve for a highly skilled new Canadian, let's just say going back to the accounting piece, and this is a placement that we've done for a few accounting offices here in Niagara, is that when we broke it all down and had conversations, they understood that the learning curve of bringing someone in from a Canadian school and bringing someone in from an international school, a lot of the programs and systems are a little bit similar, and the training wasn't that daunting. And we were able to actually spend more time looking at some of the cultural training stuff that we do here at the YMCA of Niagara with the Employer Link program every day. So another question that helps spark some questions at the end is, how can internationally trained individuals add value to your organization? I've touched upon a few other things, but I think at the end, we'd be excited to see what some of the opportunities are at the end. So why hire? So meet your labor needs. So we can't, have all these skilled positions go. We got to take a chance and hire and train these internationally trained individuals. I just did a presentation with the Niagara Industrial Association, and I said, I see a lot of employers cherry picking established people already, but to meet our labor needs, we have to start planting some cherry trees and not just take the cherries off the top, right? So we have to understand that there is training, and that's going to be important. Increase your competitiveness. So understanding that new ideas will birth new ideas, new technologies, and then access to the new markets is something I've established. And then make your organization more effective. So ITS can bring a fresh perspective into stimulating new thinking and moving things forward. So when we look at how do we welcome new Canadians, the first stop is, what does your job posting look like? And this is what we're spending a lot of time with Employer Link, is that, the number one thing, and we just had a group of new Canadians into our office and just talking about their different challenges that they have with applying for work. And the number one frustration, so we had people from Colombia, we had people from India, people from Turkey, so a wide variety from all over the world. The number one said they always hear or always see in a job posting is Canadian experience. And Deanna and I have been working hard, and our staff have been working hard on gently challenging employers to say, why do you have that Canadian experience in there? Like, technically, can you define it? Most times they cannot. And that is a real tough barrier that is completely, for lack of a better term, fabricated. So, understanding that the learning curve could be very similar to established Canadian to a new Canadian. So when you're putting job postings out there that have terms like Canadian experience, you're definitely putting yourself at a risk, but also you're also putting yourself at missing out on some opportunities, especially looking at maybe some language that you're doing in job postings. Job interviews as well. So, I think there is a little bit too much focus on Canadian experience, and we want, as the employer link program here at the YMCA of Niagara, we try to challenge that a little bit. So we've looked at some concepts, and the key thing, and I know Deanna is going to add a little bit more before we wrap up for the question and answer period, but it's just the small little shifts that you need to. It doesn't need to be this overly extended, elaborate changes to your organization. It's just like, are we welcoming enough? Look at some different opportunities on how your job postings, your advertising, your marketing works. Is there an invite to different cultures to either apply for your jobs or even access your business? So sometimes it just takes a little bit of reflection, some conversation. We can definitely help if you're looking for more of an elaborate consultant route and a more elaborate equity and diversity and inclusion plan. Absolutely. But a lot of the businesses, and ourselves specifically, and I'd like to, Deanna's additions to this, is ourselves at the YMCA of Niagara, it's just been small incremental changes in our culture and being more inclusive every day. And we've made some mistakes, and now we're kind of learning from that and making sure that we're more diverse. So Deanna, anything to add about, just the YMCA of Niagara and the small little equity and diversity pieces that we've taken on?
The only other thing I really want to wrap up with, Kelly, you did an excellent job, and so we'll turn the floor to questions, but I do want to give a shout out because you've referenced employer link program, and I really want to recognize that this is a program that is delivered in partnership with Workforce Collective. It's unique in nature in terms that it is really front-facing work with employers, with research, with a heavy research component to it. And the goal of this program is to really start to put some analytics together in terms of why it is good business. And so when we marry program delivery, immigration, and research together, go figure, it actually will help us produce some pretty impressive results. The other thing, we didn't talk a lot about the employment services piece. We really focused on immigrant services, but employment services in Niagara, whether it's through a settlement organization or an Employment Ontario organization or Workforce Collective or any other organization that's delivering government-funded employment services, there are opportunities to work with an individual who has that experience to help you as an employer. It is zero cost to access these resources. And so if you are a small to medium enterprise, which most of Niagara is, as Mishka certainly will speak to, that those can be very costly ventures in terms of doing some of that research. The good news is there are government funded programs that are right in your own backyard that have the talent and the treasure, the dollars that back it, to talk about what that means and to help support you as an employer. So thank you very much, Jonesy, Kelly, great job in talking about Employer Link, and I'll turn the floor back to Mishka and questions.
Deanna and Kelly, thank you so very much for the great overview. I think it's really, really helpful. Before I'm going to go into some of the questions that have come forward and that are really worth discussing, Deanna, you just mentioned some of the resources that are available to individuals. Is there a way that they can be shared with us and we can make sure that those are available to all attendees as being part of the overall package for those ones who are committed in developing their EDI kind of commitment within the organization? Or if you have a web link that might be of help too, we are more than willing to share it in our chat here with others. But I think that would be extremely, extremely helpful. So thank you for that. Here are some of the questions that have come forward and maybe also have come out of the presentation here. And I think, Deanna, it was likely driven by the start to your presentation. Businesses need to be and have been challenged to be more agile than ever and beforehand. Historically, we looked at agility as being something cut costs and reallocate spending in response to some sort of market conditions that businesses are facing. But true agility can be defined, and it comes usually from individual. And that really calls for typical set of a mindset change from a place where change is maybe scary and is maybe unforeseen, but also provides some opportunities for improvement. You talked about your mindset change that you have gone through. How were you able to filter it out to the team? When you looked at it and saying, like, this makes us as an organization more agile, what are some of the key takeaways for individuals who are listening in and saying, how can it translate now?
I guess the first piece of advice or feedback from reflection is it's hard. It's not easy. We are not always going to get it right. And sometimes you take a little bit of a misstep and then you just regroup. At the end of the day, for businesses who have responded in a way, it's like anything. The Ys experience the same thing. We all know this. We've had to close major Ys. And by the way, the Y's still open. I know because I still get a paycheck from there. And so we've simply had to reduce our portfolio of what we're delivering because of the income that was coming in. No different than any other business. And I think strategically, one of the things that we've come to learn, specifically in our Department of Employment and Immigrant Services, in employment, which predated immigrant services, to Kelly's point, we started to see Spanish speakers coming in. Most had been hired to work with local farmers, and they were choosing to stay. And as they stayed, they were needing support. So one of the things that we did is we hired, because we were having difficulty serving, we hired a Spanish speaker. And from that Spanish speaker came droves of people seeking employment coaching to the point where we couldn't keep up. And it was an expense to go above and beyond the budget we already had in existence to hire that extra coach. But within months, that coach paid for themselves. And the truth of the matter is, from that coach was born our immigrant services department. An entire department, because the word got out that we were serving a specific population. The Y's always been inclusive. It's in everything we do, but we didn't serve that community in first language or through that cultural lens. And the second we started to do those things, it really did drive everything that we do in this department, and then it permeated out into our whole association.
I think it's an excellent point, because we've had similar conversations with other businesses across Niagara who have run into these challenges. And I even recently read a study, it was by the HR Research Institute, and I looked at organizations and saying, like, how committed is your organization, or the sense of it. Only 15% of respondents said actually that they were at the stage where they're comfortable with it. And in all conversations we have with businesses, we really need to understand that this is a growing commitment. This doesn't happen overnight. And I think we need the patience with one another as we're moving forward. But I think there's such significant learning from one another that also takes place. And I think in just your simple approach, as you said, you changed the language in which we offered the services, and it made a difference.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that one too, just because of an experience that I had with ProCon in Welland on Friday. So, you talk about the term agility, and, I think it works perfectly with also creativity. And so example, what ProCon's done with one of our Power of Trades participants is that, his resume, if it came through, your Indeed portals, probably wouldn't get flagged, probably wouldn't get recognized, but we were able to advocate. And Greg from ProCon, the operations manager, he was very open and honest. He's like, we are looking for new people. And we both suggested that maybe just a more casual conversation, a facility tour with that participant was the better angle than going through your traditional interview piece. So the time commitment was maybe an extra 30 minutes to an hour on Greg's end, but then he was able to, understand that, what the client was more about, what their goals were here in Canada, and then also understanding that, has a Spanish speaking people. So his training plan would involve working with the Spanish people that are already established in his organization or on his shop floor where they build some of the electrical ends. So it's an important move forward on that. Yeah.
And I think it actually leads me kind of quite into another thought, that a lot of us have the sense that we all live in an echo chamber. You know, we always communicate through the same channels, the same way. And it's a part of it. It's just because the workload is high. We are understaffed. And so we just rhetorically say, like, I need to fill this, I need to get this out. And I'm going the same way about as I've always done. And I was wondering if you can speak to maybe encouraging employers to look at different resources when promoting vacancies, different resources in supporting employees that are coming on board that might be available to them that maybe have never been considered previously. And I'm not sure, Deanna or maybe Kelly, if I ask you to take this first and then we can pass it on to Deanna.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of our programs and our funding sources are all changing rapidly, and then so starting with the conversation either between myself or Deanna and the YMCA of Niagara staff or any Employment Ontario office is important, because we can kind of move you along in the right direction. So if your staff do need an EDI training, could you use the Canada Ontario Job Grant, or CODGE training is what it's known as? Or is it just a matter of getting your posting out there and then getting you set up in a more, I guess, casual interview, like I just mentioned with the employer on Friday? I think that's really, really important to understand, is that, just the right direction, a little bit of context, and moving away from, straight online applications and just doing those slight changes and having that conversation either with us or, most importantly, with the applicant, especially if they are an internationally trained individual, to understand their story and their journey is going to be quite crucial. So yeah, starting with moving towards a conversation, I think we're all in need of more of those face-to-face or Zoom conversations since COVID. We've been doing a lot of electronic email communication, but now understanding context and stories of each situation, I think it's important. Deanna, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think, one thing that, we're an Employment Ontario provider, but also Immigrant Services, and it does, like many Employment Ontario providers, it gives us a unique advantage point because our clients are both the employers and the job seekers. And the truth is, we know employers, this is literally a day in the life of an Employment Ontario office. Nobody's looking for work. Nobody's hiring. Nobody's looking for work. Nobody's hiring. And the disconnect is like the Grand Canyon. And I think, again, to Peter Jonesy's point, we really do have to be having more conversations about what that looks like. To say that I have 15 positions and I can't find anybody to fill them, typically what will happen is when we start that conversation with an employer, we really do begin the conversation on recruitment with purpose. So, and recruitment with purpose is everything, because if you just broadcast a job posting out, natural filters like Indeed in those places, truthfully, they filter out some very, very capable candidates because they didn't hit your key markers. I'm not saying don't use Indeed. Okay, Indeed did not hear me say that. But I think that we want to be really purposeful when we're putting job postings out and what that looks like. And to Jonesy's point, he gave you an example of an employer. And one example that I have, an employer was looking for laborers, but couldn't fill the need. We had laborers whose language level was quite low, and we did not feel comfortable putting them on the job yet for health and safety reasons. And we felt that that was very important. So we strategically helped him purposefully recruit and pay good money for a Spanish-speaking supervisor. And so he had a vacancy in the supervisor role. And so we helped him specifically look and locate for the individual that he needed, and filling his labor shortage in terms of having laborers was solved. They all had health and safety in first language. They were all primed and ready for the job. They could communicate with their supervisor safely. And the environment that they worked in was very culture appropriate. And the employer, no complaints whatsoever, but would not have thought about, he thought about hiring them in the ground level, but didn't think about what hiring in the level above would do to his recruitment efforts. Sadly, we did our job so well, he doesn't need us any longer because he has figured it out. And that's what we want. If we're not working to put ourselves out of business, so if we're not working to put ourselves out of business with you, then we're not working appropriately. Our goal is to help you be the best employer in recruitment and retention that you can be. This is fundamentally why we exist.
Thank you very much. And I think it's an excellent example of how we try to solve sometimes one problem, one situation with this very narrow lens on it, but we need to actually broaden our perspective on it to ensure that we have the infrastructure that actually creates that stability. At the end of this is a question that had come forward, and I think it's a valid question. At the end of last year, the government announced that international students who were previously capped at 20 hours work week can now that cap was removed, so it doesn't exist. Is that an opportunity for employers that they now can actually hire someone who can work 35 to 40 hours a week for them? Do you see that employers are taking advantage of that? And Kelly, if you want to talk to that.
Yeah, just real quickly, I still, my personal perspective, there's still some reluctancy to hire new Canadians on a work permit. We're trying to educate on, the legalities of it and so on. But we want to, the story that I'm trying to put out there is that and Deanna mentioned coming out of World War II, we all our families have these great stories about, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, great-grandmother, they came with $5 in their pocket and they built all this wonderful stuff. And now it's, as employers, I encourage them to be part of those new stories that could be started, right? And giving a chance and looking at some different opportunities. Of course, encouraging them to improve their English skills is important, but I think that we're hoping that more employers will be more motivated. And if they need some guidance on working through the work permits, our immigration staff are phenomenal at that. Same thing with Niagara Folk Arts or Welland Heritage Council, just to understand the legalities and the limitations of some of the work permits. But yeah, they have improved for more full-time opportunities.
Very good. Another question that
Can I just add that, Ms. Goodyear, just very quickly, sorry, because a lot of folks are looking now at the international students as a possible movement forward into filling labor market gap. And just so we're clear, the second they graduate, they're no longer international. Okay, they were educated in Canada. They're no longer an immigrant in terms of their education. And so a lot of folks are leaning in that direction and still referring to them as internationally educated, when in fact, yes, they may have come with some international education, but they've now been educated in Canada. And I don't want us to seek a solution in that vein without, I don't want us to overlook the internationally trained individuals that are already here. And so it can be rather convoluted. And so again, I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning and simply say, what is it you need and how do we fill that gap, regardless of the person's status or education, in fact, of where it was obtained, and how do we move them into your workforce?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I appreciate the differentiation between the two and the clarity that is needed from an employer's perspective. When we started the webinar, we looked at two sides of it. We looked at the organizations attracting talent, and we have spent most of the day about this webinar about this, but we also looked at it and through the perspective of saying this can also translate in attracting new customers to yours. And one of the questions that an attendee has here is, do organizations need to employ a different approach when it comes to attracting talent versus attracting customers? And I thought it's an interesting distinction because it's a very significantly different role, both equally valuable to a business. But I was wondering if you sometimes come up against that and seeing how can we help employers with some of the services that you might offer.
I think that when you hire talent, regardless of culture, community, or language, your customers will come. People come to see people. Yes, they want the goods and service, but people come to see people. People refer to people. People work with people. And so I do believe that when you are hiring talent that does appeal to specific customer bases, it expands your business in many, many ways, and probably too many ways to talk about in one call because it's very individualized to the employer, whether it's a manufacturing industry and it allows you to be more international in your delivery, whether it is a grocery store or a bank. If I was to have this conversation and there was a room full of employers, the conversation would have to start with, well, what is your business and what are you selling? What is the customers that you're looking for? Because the talent that you're hiring would have to be somebody who can appeal to that audience. Doesn't have to be a Spanish speaker, but it would have to be somebody who could work with the Spanish community, right? So if we use those examples, I know that's not the best answer, but I'm trying to really, I'm being very strategic, and if Viv were here, she'd be laughing because I say this all the time, as you know, Mishka, is really about an employer is no different than the one-on-one service I would give a client. And so if I'm working one-on-one with a client, I'm not going to tell them to go and apply to 55 different jobs in all kinds of categories. I would say, well, let's talk about where your strengths are. Let's talk about what you want. And so to the employer, I would say the same thing. It becomes very individualized. A lot of stuff we're saying here today may have a global effect. However, it's important that we apply that context directly to what it is we are trying to accomplish as a business.
Mm-hmm. And then to add to the individualization and starting with the employment piece, and when we look at maybe increasing populations, people from India here in Niagara, we can't be like, here's how it is to work with people from India. There's 1.4 billion people in India, right? There are all so many different cultures and within that country, right? So just getting to understand, those new employees as specific people, and then obviously making sure they feel welcome, and then that will roll into, as Deanna mentioned, into those communities, into those market groups, and help grow your business. And all starts with that proper welcoming culture to, from people all over the world to your employee team, is kind of those, once again, small little individual customizations and understanding their perspectives and welcoming their perspectives will snowball into a lot of success, from HR to just straight business.
We spend most of that time so far talking about cultural literacy on both sides, from both ends. We talked about language barriers, again, from both sides, employer recognition being part of it. Some of the other barriers that are prominent ones for newcomers to continue their career in Canada are about the legal status, the transferring of credentials, the license and certification process. Those are three really key ones. And I was wondering, if someone comes to you, or an employer comes to you, or a potential employee, how can we help them? And how can we help employers to saying, like, here's the pathway that you need to take to remove those barriers?
I honestly think the employers are in the driver's seat on this one. They're going to get way more leverage than I will ever get. And I've been doing this for 30 years. At the end of the day, employers, you get to choose. Aside from anything that is governed and as mandated as you must pass a credentialing process, such as being a CPA or a nurse or a doctor, you get to decide. It's your business. Nobody is saying to you what level of Canadian experience that you must have. And so a lot of our newcomers who are coming over here are struggling because employers, really through no fault of their own, it's one of the simplest things when we have a conversation with an employer, but it's one of the biggest aha moments is, yeah, I guess I get to rewrite that. Yeah, you write the policy. It's your HR decision. And so for our newcomers, we do our very best that's part of the Employer Link program, with Workforce Collective is doing that research, is asking that question. Do they have to have this credential in Canada, or they just have to have the credential?
No, it's an excellent point of view. And I think, Kelly, you wanted to maybe get into it as well. Did I see you wanting to say something?
Yeah, just with the announcement of the engineering qualifications in Ontario, I think that was in the newspaper today, is that a lot of that, and kind of adding on to Deanna about, encouraging businesses, take the leadership and take the ownership of hiring the people, but also not underestimating, as businesses or an industry, the political pressure that you could, encourage your MPPs or your MPs to say, this needs to change. We're having these issues on if there is one of those standards that cannot be circumvented, to make what are some training opportunities and government support. So it can't, we can advocate, but, especially on a provincial setting, businesses carry a lot of political clout, and to making sure that they're working with their chambers like yourself and the GNCC and putting those messages out there to encourage policy change is important.
I think there's a real loud support right now for it, that we need to be significantly more flexible than what we have been in beforehand, and time is of the essence at the same time too. So it's critical. You had mentioned that you offer staff training or staff training resources for employers and employees to develop their diversity skills, their inclusion skills. What are some of can you speak in more detail? So if someone is here on the call and saying like, I'm going to follow up with Deanna, I'm going to follow up with Kelly on the following. What are some of the things that you would offer, or that your organization offers?
Well, we can do, there's a number, it goes down quite a bit, but right from the higher, easier level of some group training in EDI with your group staff, could be some mentorship training with your supervisory group. We would certainly welcome a panel of our immigrant services staff, which we've done with many employers, including, believe it or not, the province has had us out for their labor division and their inspectors. So we've gone and we've talked about what EDI is, and culture in particular, not just EDI, but culture in particular in the workplace and what that looks like. And so we can do those pieces. It's far more impactful, to be honest, if it's small group. It's very much catered to the business, one-on-one if you're hiring individuals. But we also have the ability to do and support employers with the Canadian Ontario Job Grant. And EDI can fall into some of those things depending on what you're studying, what you're doing. But there is a multitude of ways between Employment Ontario, immigrant services, and immigration funding, all the way to other federal dollars that can support. And if we don't do it, or we can't support it, please know that our responsibility to our community, this is where we live, and so we need employers to thrive, we need our community to thrive, because I live here with my children, and so I need it to be that way. And so if I don't have the answer, or Kelly doesn't, we're going to help navigate to the best possible solution so that you get the resources that you're looking for.
That's excellent, because there's so many organizations that are looking for it right now. And I think a lot of organizations will also feel pretty much on their own in doing it. So I think that is extremely helpful. I'm conscious of the time. We always commit to people saying like we don't go beyond the hour, but I thought if I pass maybe the mic over to you for another like 30 seconds as closing comments. Maybe Kelly, if you start out, and then I'll pass it over to Deanna, and then we'll wrap it up from there. So Kelly, over to you. Something that you maybe think about, what you want people to leave this webinar with.
Yeah, I'm just going to look at, obviously the conversation piece is what we really want to focus on. And then starting all these, looking potential changes and starting with those conversations, either with us or other people here in Niagara. And then also understanding that a lot of the changes that we want to see in our cultural diversity, especially on the hiring front, are your responsibility, or as an employer, you have the opportunity to make those stories and create someone's new beginnings in Canada a greater success. Deanna?
Yeah, quite simply, never stop asking, never stop learning. Always reach out to you, Mishka, or to wherever you're going to be reaching out to. We will help navigate that process as best as possible. Thanks for taking the time today, and the fact that you were here today. It really does show what direction you want your business to go into. And that's, to me, that's just awesome.
I feel the same, actually. So thank you, Deanna and Kelly, for being with us over this lunch hour, to YMCA Employment and Immigrant Service of Niagara for being such a big support for the knowledge that needs to go, that needs to be shared to actually create the business culture and the work environment in Niagara. And I think with all of that, it also creates our economic and social well-being for more people than we've had beforehand. Thank you to all participants who are with us. The webinar has been recorded and will be shared with you along with some other resources that have been mentioned. I think this is only the first step of our conversation. I think there's much more to come, and I think we need to really commit to a much more frequent conversation about the topic that we just touched on. Thank you for that, and I wish everyone a wonderful week. Thank you.
Thank you.